Hi, my name is Kirsten Tibballs and I'm going to show you a super simple tart, but it looks absolutely spectacular. This is what you're going to create to impress at your next dinner party. To start, we're going to create a shortbread pastry for our tart cases. Make sure your butter is chilled, and for most baking applications, we always use unsalted butter. With a pastry, you either mix the sugar and the butter together until it's smooth and then add in eggs and flour, or you add the butter and the flour first. What you're actually doing is coating the flour with the fat, which actually stops the gluten from developing, which will avoid the pastry actually shrinking. So flour in first, just plain flour or all-purpose flour. Cube your butter so it's easy to incorporate. Make sure it's quite cold. You can also do this step by hand or in a food processor. Don't let it come together as a paste, just till it's a crumb and you've got no large lumps of butter. While that's mixing, I'm going to combine some caster sugar, egg, and a little bit of water. Water is a secret ingredient here because it helps to make the pastry a little bit more elastic and a little bit less crumbly and therefore easy to roll out. Just mix these together. Once we've got no large lumps of butter, we're going to add our egg mixture into the mixer. The trick is to catch it before it comes together as a paste. So I think we're there. You can open it up and just check. So see if there's any lumps of butter. There's no butter in there, so that's all dough. So I'm ready now to add in the egg mixture. Second tip, just mix it until it comes together. Even though we've coated the flour with butter, if we continue to mix it after it's come together as a dough, you'll start to develop the gluten, and that's when your pastry shrinks during rolling out and during baking. Ta-da, very, very quick. Scrape off the paddle. Now the pastry at this stage is going to be really quite soft, but we're going to place it back into the fridge to firm up for about an hour. When you place this in the fridge, you want it to be very even and very flat, because if you're impatient like me, you'll want it to firm up as quickly as possible so you're not waiting so long. So press it down until it's quite flat. Now that goes into the fridge for an hour. My pastry has been in the fridge for an hour and it's ready to roll out. Just a little tip, I'm wearing black. Don't wear black when you're using flour because it ends up going everywhere. If your pastry gets soft at any stage during the rolling out process, you can place it back into the fridge, and don't roll it all out at once. So do it in smaller portions and put the remainder back into the fridge. So I'm just going to roll out a little bit to start. You can see I've got my tart rings here ready to go. A good tart ring to use is actually an egg ring. So you don't have to go out and purchase these if you've got some egg rings. Just make sure that the egg ring you have is not too low, that it's high enough to fit all the fillings we're going to place in the tart. Going to place the rest into the fridge. Now dusting. Pinch the flour in your hand. We're just using plain flour or all-purpose flour. Then just shake your hand until it comes out. It's hard to see on this bench surface, but cover it quite liberally, particularly at the start so the pastry doesn't stick. Go again on top. Then a rolling pin. If you've got a rolling pin like I have where the center rotates around, don't put this into the sink because it has ball bearings in it and the ball bearings will rust and seize up the rolling pin. Okay, so we roll it. Just roll it a few times to start with and then check that it's still got flour underneath. Put a little bit more flour and then we move it around the bench. Lift it up once again, a little bit more flour on top. So use more flour at the start, and then as the pastry gets thinner, we use less and less flour. Now I'm a bit spoiled, so I've got a ring that I'm going to cut the pastry out with, which is slightly bigger than my tart, but you can also use an overturned bowl. So find one that's going to give you enough pastry to go up the sides of your tart ring and have a little bit left over. Cut them as close together as you can. I get 4, not quite. Pick the pastry up, drop it in. So loosely hold it in your fingers and center it and drop it in, and then push it right into the corners. Now, if I hold that up to you, you'll see that I haven't actually got the pastry right into the corners. So if I trim the top of that now, as it bakes, the pastry is going to slide down to fill that corner up. So I'll hold it up so you can see. Can you see how I haven't got that right into the corners? So always pick it up and have a quick look. It may need to go in the fridge first so it doesn't fall through your tart case. Now what I do is I lift the tart ring up and I push the pastry down. So lift it up and push the pastry down so I'm going right into the corners, and I'll show you the difference. Okay, have a look at the difference now. All this offcuts, don't screw it up into a ball. We brush off the excess flour and we put that with our fresh dough that's still in the fridge so that we're not overworking the dough. That's another reason why you shouldn't roll all the dough at once, so we can put the fresh dough back with the scraps and we're not going to start to develop the gluten because we've overworked the dough. See, here we have the fresh dough straight from the fridge. We put the dough that we've rolled directly on top and just press it down. Then we start the process all over again by dusting the bench and rolling our last 3 tarts. Now, if you've got any leftover pastry at all, I always freeze it, and then you can grate that once it's frozen to create a crumble. No flour, look at me. We're ready now to trim the tarts, so they've been in the fridge. So use a small sharp knife, and we're just going to simply trim around the top. Make sure you don't angle the knife up or down, keep it completely flat. You can make this tart as a large tart as well if you want to, and if you've got a fluted large tart, do they call them flan tins? You can use that as well. This is one of the most divine recipes. It tastes absolutely beautiful. I've got a great idea for the finished design, which I think you're going to absolutely love. So after I've trimmed all these, I'm going to place this into the freezer. So when we line them, the baking paper that we use doesn't crease the pastry at all. Freeze these for about an hour before we line them with baking paper. Now, baking paper is coated with silicone, which makes it quite firm. Also non-stick, which is great, but not so great for what we're doing with the tarts. We're going to do what we call blind bake them. So we're going to bake them with a lining in there so that as it starts baking, we've got something in there to hold up the sides of the tart. We're going to remove that partway through the baking and continue the baking process. Now, baking paper is a great medium to use to hold in the filling. I'm going to use rice to hold up the sides of my tart shell. Because this has silicone on both sides, a great idea to actually soften and break down that silicone is to scrunch the paper up a few times. So scrunch it, smooth it out. Great job for the kids. Keep scrunching it and smoothing it out until it starts to soften. And hang on to these and use them over and over again. The more you use them, the softer they will become. Make sure you tuck it right into the corners. And we're going to fill it with some rice. I keep this just as baking rice. It's raw rice. And make sure you fill the tart right to the top. Then I just store this in my pantry until I make tarts again. We're ready to go straight into the oven. Even if they're still partially frozen, they can go into the oven now. So they bake at 170 degrees Celsius for 10 minutes with the rice in them. We then remove the rice and cook them for a further 4 to 6 minutes or until they're a light golden brown color. Now, every oven is different. Also, I'm guessing you're never going to roll the pastry exactly the same thickness, so the baking time may vary slightly. These have been out of the oven for a few minutes. It's always a good idea to take the ring off while they're still warm. If you're not using Teflon rings, which you can get, you may need to put a tiny bit of vegetable oil on the rings before you remove the pastry. You also may need to run your knife around the edge to ensure that they don't stick. Let's test this one. My hands, because of years of working and holding hot products, really have very little nerves in the end, so I don't really feel the heat anymore, which isn't a good thing, but it's great for applications like this. We're now moving on to the strawberry compote, which is absolutely divine. We've got some diced strawberries here, which we're going to place into a saucepan. You could have this on its own, just with ice cream, and it'd be beautiful. Some sugar. And some vanilla bean paste. I'm going to place this on the stove, and while I'm stirring it, I'm going to simmer it for 2 to 3 minutes just to reduce some of the water, and then I'm going to place it in a bowl to cool down. It's a shame that you're not in this kitchen and you can't smell the beautiful aroma of the strawberries. We've just cooked them down a little bit. Leave them at room temperature to cool, maybe for about half an hour. We're going to put some plastic wrap on the surface, and then we're going to chill them in the fridge. This can be made in advance, so this can actually be made maybe 2 days in advance before applying it to your tart. We're going to start with a white chocolate Chantilly cream, or a whipped white chocolate ganache, they also call it. This is really easy to make, and it is one of my most favorite things. It's like choosing a child, a favorite child, which you should never do, but this is definitely one of my favorites. It's beautiful on its own, but in this tart, it is absolutely magical. It's simple to make, but it does need to rest in the fridge for at least 6 hours before it's whipped up. We're going to place the first group of cream, which is a smaller group of cream, into a saucepan. Going to add some vanilla bean paste. You can leave the vanilla out if you want to. You probably guessed by now I'm a big fan of vanilla. I'm going to add in some liquid glucose. You can get this from the supermarket. It is a sugar derived from wheat, but it doesn't contain gluten. Now I've cheated a little bit. I've heated that in the microwave so it comes out of the bowl really easily. Otherwise it can be quite sticky. I'm going to place my white chocolate. Always try where you can to use a good quality chocolate. You'll thank me for it later. Place that in a larger bowl. We're going to boil this cream on the stove, and then we're going to pour it over the chocolate. Whisk it together. Now once all the chocolate's melted, we're going to add in the larger group of cream, which is chilled. Now why we do this is so that we don't have to wait as long for this to cool down. So we're cooling this in the fridge for 6 hours so that the butter that's present in the cream and the cocoa butter that's present in the chocolate can re-solidify before we whip it up. If you whip it up too early, you'll find that it'll actually separate. We whisk that together. When we've got something like this that's hot and it contains water, because there's water present in the cream, you always have to cover it with cling wrap so the cling wrap touches the surface to avoid evaporation of moisture and to avoid it getting a skin. I have some freeze-dried strawberries here. Now I've taken them out of the package just to show you, but if you let them sit at room temperature for too long, they will go soft because they'll absorb moisture from the atmosphere really, really quickly. So I'm going to put them in a piece of cling wrap, roll it up, crush them a little bit, it's a little bit faster. There we go, I'm going to leave that there. I'm going to now melt the chocolate. We're going to melt the chocolate. You would normally use plastic, but I'm using glass for your viewing pleasure so you can see what I'm doing. We're going to melt this in the microwave in 30-second increments till we've got half liquid, half solid chocolate. Then don't place it back into the microwave. We're just going to stir it. The problem with glass is it retains too much heat, so it's going to overheat your chocolate after you remove it from the microwave. Give the white chocolate a stir. I think we're almost about halfway melted, halfway solid chocolate. We're not being absolutely precise with tempering with this particular method because we're adding so many ingredients to the chocolate that are at room temperature. If you've got some stubborn chocolate buttons that don't melt, at this stage I wouldn't put it back in the microwave. I would just put your hairdryer on it just to gently melt them with some dry heat. The other thing when you're melting chocolate and you're stirring it is to be very patient because it takes some time for the buttons to actually melt. So you've got to give it a really good stir for a couple of minutes before you admit defeat and you pull the hairdryer out. I'm going to add in some grapeseed oil. What the grapeseed oil does is ensures that the chocolate's not going to set too hard. So if you go to bite into the tart or cut it, it's going to have a slightly softer cut. Grapeseed oil is really quite neutral in flavour, which is why I use it. Mix that in. We've got some rice bubbles that we're going to add in. You could also use cornflakes if you wanted to. What the chocolate does is it's going to coat the rice bubbles and the freeze-dried strawberries, seal them so they stay crunchy. If either of these are left exposed, they will go soft very, very quickly. We'll add in the freeze-dried strawberries. Mix it in until everything's coated, preferably in the bowl. It'll look like there's not going to be enough chocolate to coat everything, but there is. Imagine this as a breakfast cereal. I might have stumbled across something here. Just spoon a small amount in the bottom of the tart, and then we spread it out. So it's a nice thin layer. So don't do a double layer, if you know what I mean. So just a single layer of this on the base. If you do happen to have any leftovers, you can just spread it out on some baking paper and eat it. You may have a little bit left over. You can just spread it out on some baking paper and eat it. The berry compote is cool. Some of that on top. Just a thin layer. Now, if you want to simplify this, you can leave out one of these two elements and just do one or the other. But I would brush the tart shells with some egg yolk, raw egg yolk, as soon as it comes out of the oven to seal it, and that'll help it stop absorbing moisture from the strawberry layer. Because we've got the chocolate layer in there, it's going to help to keep the pastry nice and crunchy. We're ready to apply the Chantilly cream, and I happen to have one here that I prepared earlier. You must make sure it comes straight from the fridge and it doesn't warm up at all on the bench before you whip it, because it separates very easily. Now this will whip in a very short amount of time, so don't walk away from the mixer. In fact, it whips so quickly that you can actually whisk it by hand. Make sure that this is going to hold and it's not too soft. We don't want semi-whipped, we want fully whipped cream without over whipping it. If it's not whipped enough, it might collapse a little bit. So you can finish it by hand or you can put it back on the mixer, but to me that needs a tiny bit more whipping. I always think to myself, if I do this little bit of exercise, then I can eat more dessert. I think that's how it works. So you can see there that just that little bit of whisking, it's holding a lot better, and that's now ready to be applied to the tarts. To put the cream on, you can either pipe it or you can actually spoon it on, but we're going to be quite generous with the amount of cream that we're placing on. You could really just serve it like that, but I have got a great finish for it. This is the fun part. We're actually going to smooth out the cream. You can use a small butter knife, or I've got one of these, which is a small palette knife. Firstly, just bring it to the edge. Then you might find it easier to actually place it on the tray. We're going to smooth it over, so we're going to create quite an even dome. I know you can do it. Got faith in you. Okay, so just smoothing, taking off the excess as you go. Just think of diving in and eating that. It's going to be absolutely delicious. I'm just picking it up to finish it off. So what we're going to do with these after we finish smoothing them all off is we're going to place them into the freezer, probably for about an hour before dipping the top in chocolate. So that's what we're looking for, a slightly domed surface on top so that we've got a nice finish to dip in chocolate. I'm using a glass bowl again, but you're not going to. You're going to use plastic. Otherwise, after you temper your chocolate, it can untemper because the bowl will be too hot. We're going to melt this in the microwave in 30-second increments till it's half liquid, half solid chocolate. Then we're just going to really vigorously stir it. So at this stage, I wouldn't apply any more heat. I would just simply stir it so it looks like I've got half liquid, half solid chocolate. Now the chocolate is tempered. If you don't know if it's tempered or not, what you can do is take a small piece of baking paper, dip it in the chocolate, leave it at room temperature, and it should take 10 minutes to set. Milk chocolate will take 7 and dark chocolate takes 5. If you want to go right into tempering, we do have another video on our YouTube channel on tempering, which really zones in and focuses on different techniques of tempering. Now that we've got that tempered, we're going to add in some grapeseed oil. This is going to stop the chocolate from cracking when we dip the tart in. And that's because the cream of the tart is going to be so cold. Now I'm going to take a portion of this out and I'm going to colour it with some red oil-soluble colour. I'm going to take the oil-soluble colour, always use a powder, never use a liquid. And we're going to sieve that in. Do it through a really fine sieve because this is a different fat to the fat present in the chocolate. So sometimes it's difficult to combine, but sieving it will help. And you can really make these any colour you like. I'm doing red because it's got berries inside. Also think this is cute for Mother's Day. You could use it for Christmas. You could use it for Valentine's Day. So I think the red and white goes with so many different occasions. I'll give that a stir, and then if we need to add more colour, we'll add a little bit more in. Got to try and do this as quickly as possible because your chocolate is cooling down and setting as we speak. If it starts to get a little bit too thick, you can use your hairdryer just to gently reheat it. So you can see that that's quite grainy, so it takes quite a bit of stirring and elbow grease to actually get that colour to combine in properly. Perfect red colour. I'm going to make a piping bag with some paper. You can also use a Ziploc bag. With this, we cut an offset triangle out of baking paper, then we just roll it until you've got the 3 points here at the bottom, and then we fold it in. We've also got a tutorial on that on our YouTube. We're going to place the chocolate into a smaller bowl. You can also do this in a jug. If the chocolate needs heating, now's the time to do it. You can warm it up a little bit before we put the red on top. Otherwise, once we put the red on top, it's a little bit more work to reheat it. Putting the red chocolate in the piping bag, only ever fill it halfway. Always fold the bag away from the seam. So fold the 2 corners down and then fold the middle down. We'll cut quite a bit off. And we're going to pipe a grid pattern on the surface of the white chocolate. So go across one way, turn the bowl, then we go across in the opposite direction. Now I'm going to take one tart at a time from the freezer to dip it. Otherwise you're going to get condensation on the surface and the chocolate may not stick. Here we go. We're going to dip it in and we're going to twist it as we pull it up. So dip it in right to the tart shell. Then we twist it. Let's see. Let it drip off. How cute is that? The trick is with this is each time you dip, you need to pipe another layer of chocolate on the surface. Right down to the shell, that's important. Spin it. When we add more chocolate, the red will be a little bit darker each time. Just drip off the excess chocolate so it doesn't run back onto the tart. Flip it over. I've still got chocolate left in my piping bag, so I'm going to pipe once more on top. Here we go again. Twist just a little bit. Shake off the excess drips. There we have our beautiful strawberry and chocolate tart. I think this is so simple, but so impressive, and people won't know how you got those stripes on there. Now, leftover chocolate, you've got multiple options of what you can do. Obviously, we're not going to throw it out. We're going to reuse that chocolate. So either you can add the red to the white and red chocolate and mix it in, and then use that next time you're creating these tarts. But once you've added the oil, it is a little bit more tricky to temper it. It is better if you use a thermometer and heat it between 29 and 30 degrees Celsius with lots of movement. Alternately, you can actually scrape off this red layer and then separate the red and the white and then re-temper them or remelt them. It's best to use them for this application because obviously we've added the oil. Keep the chocolate in a sealed package, preferably opaque, not clear. It should last till the best before date that's stipulated on your bag of chocolate. Let's see how you go. I dare you to stop at 1. And what can I say? Compliments to the chef. If you enjoyed that episode, you will love my channel. Subscribe today for even more tutorials on chocolate and baking. Best of all, it's free, so get on it.